Welcome, and thank you all for joining us for another Microsoft Reactor live stream event. We are happy to have Lisa Cohen, a Principal Data Scientist Manager from Microsoft, joining us again on their second session of a four-part series focused on personal and business development. Today, Lisa will discuss, do you want to be a people leader? This session will run for approximately 60 minutes. Lisa will answer some questions during the session, but save additional time at the end for any of the bulk questions that come in. If this is your first time joining us, please note that for our Teams live sessions, there's about a 20 to 30 second delay from speaker to audience. So feel free to post questions in the chat as they come up, but again, be aware that you may not receive responses straight away. So just feel free as a question comes, drop it in there, don't save it till the tail end of the session. Also, just note a recording of the session will be uploaded to our YouTube channel in 3 to 4 days. And then at the conclusion of the session, I'll be sharing a link to our feedback survey. So please, if you have the time, do take that opportunity to submit one. We use that information to develop our future content for the reactor. At this time, I will pass the microphone over to Lisa. Lisa, thank you again for being a part of this Microsoft event.
Great, thanks for the introduction, Rebecca, and thanks everybody for joining us today. I put together this talk because I had often heard a comment from people saying, hey, I'd like to be a manager one day, and that's something they were considering for their career path. And I think is a good question for everybody to ask at some point in their career. And so, really started thinking about, what are the things to do to prepare for that? What are the things to consider if you do want to go on that career path? And then things to be aware of as far as what the role entails. And finally, I'm, very active in manager communities in and outside of Microsoft. And, I think we're constantly trying new techniques and approaches. So it's an opportunity to share those as well. I'll kick off with a little bit about myself so that you understand, the types of management experiences I'm going to be drawing from. So my name is Lisa Cohen. I have a background in math and applied sciences. I joined Microsoft a little over 16 years ago, starting in the Visual Studio organization. So that was a great experience to work with the developers and help design our Visual Studio product. And that was when I first became a manager, I guess about 12 years ago in that organization. And, I think the management role that I had has evolved where, it started off with a smaller team, still doing quite a bit of individual contributor work as well to, currently I'm a manager in a data science organization, a manager of managers, and there's definitely still, different types of individual contributions that I make, but it does differ, I think, than that initial team size. So it's been useful just to kind of reflect on that management, the role of manager at different points in that process. Other things about myself, I'm also affiliated with University of Washington as a board member for their data science program, and I do enjoy writing and speaking on a variety of topics. So on LinkedIn and Medium are a couple places where you can follow me. And you'll note that I use the term people leader for the introduction here, and that was really to note that you can grow your leadership and impact and influence in both the individual contributor and people leader manager paths. And here we're going to talk about the decision to go in the people leader path. But I think many of these leadership concepts can apply in either. We'll talk about the things to consider specifically if you want to go the people leader route, and then also just a note that really we want to aspire to be more than just that manager title. We really want to be having the impact of a thought leader at leading the organization. Great, and I see there's some questions starting in the chat. Please do feel free to keep those coming. I'll find a few natural points in the presentation to take a pause to address those. But I think that's a great way that I can get a sense of what are the questions on people's mind and keep this interactive as well. And then, like Rebecca mentioned, we'll do a more formal break at the end for further questions. So as far as how we've structured the conversation for today, first I'm going to share a few things to consider as you're deciding whether you want to become a manager. Then two, talk about steps to get there if you decide that's a path, or even just ways to kind of further evaluate that and get some hands-on experience and see how you enjoy that. Three, talk about tips to really hit the ground running and have a great onboarding period once you reach that manager role. And then four is additional leadership trainings, techniques, and practices to consider as you continue to grow your people leadership. So a few things to consider as you're deciding whether to become a manager. This first one seems pretty basic, but worth pointing out, that, think about whether you enjoy interacting with people or spending, more time alone. Obviously, in this role, you're going to be interacting with quite a few folks, including both your team members and partner teams. Communication is going to be a key aspect, so just kind of reflecting on your skills there and anything you want to continue to build on. In terms of challenging conversations, you have to be there to do the right thing in a lot of different situations. So you have to kind of be comfortable being uncomfortable, and just knowing that you're helping lead these conversations to help get the business, the customers, the team to the right place. But I think having that accountability to stand up in those scenarios is really important and represent your team and all those causes I mentioned. Negotiation, again, that's kind of being able to represent the group. There are going to be cases where you need to say no and just have some clear prioritization for the team. There are going to be conflicts that you need to manage. As you go to managing a team, you're also going to have a broader scope, and so just being very organized is helpful, and being able to clearly see, what are the priorities so that you can kind of see the forest through the trees. Being comfortable delegating, and I think, on the one hand, it's easy to say, okay, I'm happy to give my work to others, but that's maybe easier said than done. Sometimes you're really connected to that work, especially if you've been working on it as an individual before, and you also have to be able to delegate it, but then still be accountable for the results. So that's a different kind of dance, I think, to navigate, and it's definitely some best practices for how to approach that. And last one I'll note is just ready for more responsibility. There are some times where people will mention, hey, I'd like to be a manager, but then they're not sure they have time to take on, mentoring a few people. And that's not necessarily, a good sign for that path, because for one, you're going to be spending a lot of time doing those aspects. But two, I think, as a manager, we try to create good structure for our team, but there are going to be things that come up that you need to absorb and find ways to navigate and create efficiencies. So I think that is key as well, to be able to be successful with the broader scope. Next, I wanted to talk a bit from the other perspective. So, how should you be thinking about presenting yourself to be a good candidate for a manager? So, these are some things that I think about myself when I'm bringing on a manager to my team. First is being a role model. You want to make somebody a manager if they're really modeling and following the best practices in terms of how you'd like, the kind of work you'd like to be to deliver, the results they create, how they go about it. This manager is going to be coaching others on the team, and so you want to have someone who's a good representative in those ways. A great communicator, you don't want messages to be lost at different steps on the chains. That's both in terms of clarity as well as someone who can really motivate the team to come together to achieve great things. Having a passion for helping others. This is, another thing I see sometimes is, I think management, it can be looked at as the next step for a career progression. And sometimes people will say that they want to be a manager, but then they're not actually doing a lot of the things in their role that you would need to see for a manager. So one thing that, on the other hand, was inspiring for me was, there was someone who on my team who was just really being perceptive of kind of what others needed, saw someone struggling, would go to help them, was creating systemic platform investments that benefited everybody. So those are the kind of traits that you want to see, is that this person is naturally caring about, helping everybody else, helping raise up everybody else. And, that's the spirit that you really want in leaders on the team. Next one is related to that as far as being a coach or a mentor already. So we'll talk about this further in terms of the steps to become a manager, but it makes it really easy to see somebody as a manager when people are already coming to them for advice, whether that's technical advice, soft skill coaching, or whatnot. They're already seen as a leader, so makes it very logical then to promote that person to a manager, and it also makes it a really natural transition for the rest of the team because they're already working with that individual in that capacity. I think it's important to have sound judgment, values, and integrity. Again, you're going to be trusting this person to be having one-on-ones with others of your team, and you want to trust how they're going to act in that environment, and also with the various responsibilities that they're going to have in that role. Being a good representative is another good way to think about this. So, how does this person represent the team externally, perhaps in interviews, or if they, are meeting with others outside of your division, are they able to articulate the goal and the charter of the group and whatnot. I put a few leadership principles here. These are Microsoft leadership principles. We'll look at a few different industry frameworks later on, but I do identify with these. We've talked about being able to create clarity for your team. So, that focus and prioritization as far as like, what are we trying to accomplish? What's the mission? What's the vision? And really helping the team mobilize. Because if you don't have that, then you've got a bunch of people just going in different directions, and it's hard to know what to prioritize over what. And so I think that's a key responsibility that the manager holds. Being able to generate energy from the team, deliver great results, success. And I added a quote here from David Foster Wallace about how the manager can really help the team accomplish more than they would otherwise. So next, as you think about, let's say, you're interested in this path and you want to think about what are some things I can do to get experience, to position myself in this role, as well as get some feedback for myself about, how, whether it aligns with my passion and how much I enjoy this type of role. So I think, these are all experiences that you can have, responsibilities you can take on where you get to practice giving feedback, providing that clarity and vision, delegating responsibilities, doing that in an organized way, and providing thought leadership to the organization. So whether that's becoming a mentor for another employee in the group, helping interview others is a way to show, you have a sense in terms of what it takes to be successful in the group, and can represent the team externally. Managing an intern, I think, is a great experience to simulate managing a full-time employee. A lot of really similar aspects involved in terms of, setting a clear, clearly delegating the responsibility, documenting along the way the goals, the feedback, providing that coaching. So that's a great one if you have that opportunity. And I would say, for all of these also, share this aspiration or consideration with your current manager so that when these opportunities come up, they can share them with you. Because, at some point there might be an intern coming on, and if somebody else in the group has shared that they're interested, your manager will, try to do the right thing and align them there. So I think it's important to share that for yourself as well, if that's on your mind. Managing vendors, again, is another way to delegate and have clarity in terms of expectations and feedback. Leading a student project, this is something that we do in our group. We align with different universities and host capstone projects. So that's another great way I think that folks on my team have been able to practice these leadership experiences. And then finally, just raising improvements. And this one is really one that I think whether you're an individual contributor, leader, or a people leader, but it shows that you're really thinking at the organizational level, at the strategic level, stepping back and thinking about systemic improvements, whether that's processes that the organization can be reevaluating or doing in a new way, new opportunities that the group can pursue. So be vocal about that. And I think that gives the team a sense that, hey, this would be a great person to have on our leadership team, helping us pursue these opportunities further. All right, and then just to note, a couple of the common ways that you end up becoming a manager. One is the peer-to-manager route. So, perhaps the team has continued to grow, and then it's time to, add another manager to create some sub-teams for proper span of control is what you call the number of reports that an individual has. And really the standards on that do vary across the industry, anywhere from 4 to 12. On average, you'll probably see somewhere, right in the middle of those, around 8, but, can go even higher or lower in different cases. But yeah, I think the idea there is just to try to set that balance so that it's a reasonable amount of scope. You're not having too many managers in meetings, but then you're also giving time for that manager to kind of, meet deeply with each individual as well. Anyway, the other path that's common is to go from managing one team to managing a different team. And so those are a couple things to consider as we get to this next section about how to dive in and what to do next. And I see a few questions coming in, so please do keep those coming. I think a couple of them I will be addressing in the upcoming content, so I'll go a little bit further and then come back to these. So as far as diving in, what are some things to do on your first day, first 30 days, for 60 and 90 days and beyond? So first, I think, setting that first impression, meeting with the team. So schedule one-on-ones with each of your new reports so they can really get to know you individually. Give an introduction to the team, expand on kind of the about me slide that I shared at the beginning, share about your path, your experience, your values, your leadership style, your expectations, help the team get off on the right foot working with you, and and learn about what they need as well. So that gets to my next point around creating a 30, 60, 90-day plan. And that first 30 days, I really like to call it being a sponge. So one question here in the chat is, how do you balance setting direction and expectations without being too authoritative? So I think that's a really critical period when you're starting off, to really respect the fact that, hey, things were done a certain way for a certain reason. Learn about that history. I think that helps gain a lot of trust from the team. And then, yeah, you are there to help reconsider, reevaluate, find new ways. So that's going to be part of your 90-day plan. And it is helpful to kind of leverage your past experiences and perspectives and bring that to the new situation. But I think what you want to avoid is day one saying, hey, this is how I do things, and it's kind of my way or the highway. I think that even goes back to the introducing yourself. You want to share, things about yourself, kind of your must, your general team norms, but you also want to be, flexible to see how the team is operating and what they need. So there is definitely a balance there. And yeah, I think just a general guideline I would say on that is, really using that initial period to make sure that you learn about why things work the way they do, because that'll be useful context to make sure you don't just reinvent history with what's been tried before and then can build on that. Great. So then I think another key responsibility that should be there in the 90-day plan, if not sooner, is the communicating the mission, vision, strategy, and values. So this can be short. Sometimes actually shorter is better. Just being concise around what are the key goals of the team. What are you all setting out to accomplish together? Documenting that. I'll share a few notes as we go about just new considerations that have come up while we've been remote. But I think that's actually been one of the silver linings during this time, is that we've been documenting more because we're working with distributed teams. And for folks who have always been in distributed teams, this is really a lot of how they operated anyway. But for other teams that are newer to this environment, I think that's one great aspect that's coming out of this. When you put things down in writing, it just makes it a lot clearer, debatable, so that you can actually, if it's phrased a certain way, you can actually have that conversation around why others might see it differently, and then you get to a really strong shared context. So that's, I would say, I talked before about how when you have a smaller team, you might have specific individual contributions that you have to the group. Yeah, with the broader group, there are still going to be things that you deliver, but there, one of them would be something like this, would be your team mission statement and your vision doc. So, and then I put live the culture. I think that's important to not document, but actually to live. And so we say, like, culture comes up in terms of how you hire people, how you evaluate performance, what you reward. And so really be mindful about, things that you call out to recognize in the team and promote those behaviors that aspire to the culture, and that will make it real versus just something that's, printed on a piece of paper. Another role of the manager is to be able to have some storytelling and really tell the story of your team and the business impact that the group is delivering as a team, as well as, as you get into performance, being able to really articulate the impact that each individual is having for promotion scenarios, for example, and being able to quantify that. I think that goes a long way. Having some really clear business impact metrics crystallizes what the team is all about and what you're trying to accomplish. Documenting team norms and expectations. So, you might have meeting norms to send an agenda in advance, send notes afterwards, to send content 24 hours in advance to create a more inclusive environment so that people can read the content that's going to be discussed in advance rather than having to think on the spot. So these are the types of things I was describing earlier with the kind of introduction to just make it easy for your team to work with you so that they're not left guessing around, what's the best way to give you updates, the right frequency and medium. So just writing those down, I think, is really valuable. And that doesn't need to be something that you do individually. I've led a lot of great exercises where you bring together the team, and sometimes we structure it as our worries and wonders, things that, are challenges we're working through, things that we're excited about, and that helps uncover a lot of ideas about how we actually do want to operate together. So that's a really awesome collaborative exercise you can do, and a great way to also honor individuality in the team, because back when we were in person, I remember there was some around, preferences folks had on lighting, for example, in the office that we were working in. And it's not always a democracy takes all scenario, because if something is really bothersome for one person, doesn't help them work, then you kind of want to consider the common denominator in that case. All right, I think as part of your onboarding period, I find incredibly important to have some quick wins along the way. So, we can do all the talk, the vision, strategy, and goals, but being able to experience that and demonstrate that along the way, chunk up the deliverables into, more achievable parts that build up over a series, is a great way to, for one, further establish the team and what you're about, get feedback on those along the way so that you can have a continuous improvement, evolution with the future deliverables that you share. And then related to that, I would say, make sure to celebrate success and milestones along the way. So, sometimes we're kind of going from one thing to next. It's really important, for one, just to have time as a manager to reflect, to see the forest through the trees and the opportunity, but to reflect on and just look back and realize how much the team has accomplished, celebrate that together. Also celebrate milestones. I heard once, whether someone is joining the team, leaving the team, having a baby, like use any opportunity to bring the group together. I think especially during this time, fairly isolating for everybody to be quarantined. So take advantage of those opportunities to help the group, really feel like a team. Another role of the manager is, investing in the partner teams that you're doing this cross-group collaboration with. So that's part of telling the story of your team. You're representing the team to these groups, but you're also figuring out how you can work with these other groups to achieve more together. So I think, you're a key representative of the team in that way. If you're a manager of managers, or even just, establishing your group and you have certain individuals that are also part of your leadership team, I think continuing to build that culture with your leadership team is important. And then, yeah, I think just some tactical things, setting up some rhythms as you go, let's say, for your strategic priorities, having a regular recurrence. I like a 3-week sprint. I find it's like rapid enough that, you can stay connected and make some good progress while still giving a bit of time in between where you can actually make that progress. You can also do kind of monthly for key initiatives, but I think that helps keep things on track. So for your big rocks, I'd recommend that. You don't want to do too many meetings, but find a few. And then I would say if you're a brand new manager, getting a mentor is huge. I actually have a blog post on finding mentors. If you click on the Medium link that I shared earlier, that's gives tips about who to look for, how to ask for this. But in terms of a new manager, there's going to be so many brand new scenarios that you're experiencing, and many of them are things that managers typically experience all the time. And so why not just have somebody who you could ask about that, and you can still find your own unique leadership style. But having someone who can share, hey, in that scenario, here's the pros of doing it this way, some cons to consider, so that you can make more informed decisions about how you approach. And I think even if you were previously a manager, let's say you're moving to manage a new team, having somebody like an onboarding buddy, just another post that we're actually putting together for next week, is really helpful as well. And that's somebody who can help give you some context on, which way is up, what different acronyms mean, who the decision makers are for various scenarios. So it also just smooths out that onboarding period to help you be effective. So let me take a quick pause to look at the questions here. What are keys for good management progression? So feel free to follow up. I want to make sure that I'm understanding the question, but I think the idea is, as you become a manager, then to continue thinking about growing as a manager. And we will have a section dedicated to that. I think, one thing I'll say just to sum it up is there is the Carol Dweck mindset book, and it just kind of talks about ways to be a continuous learner. And so I find, if you're always looking for new ways to learn different management approaches, whether that's from mentors, from sessions like this, other leadership trainings that you can take advantage of, I think that's great to continue growing as a manager, as long as you're continuing to try new things, not getting stagnant. If you find yourself saying, oh, I've done that before, so let me just do it the same way for too long, then that means that you're kind of at a plateau. Whereas if you're continuing to take on new approaches, new responsibilities, think about the responsibilities that your manager has. How can you help them achieve their goals? Those are ways to kind of continue to grow your altitude. If you think back to the last time you stepped in a new leadership role, what is something you wish you would have done differently? How do you balance setting direction, expectations without being too authoritative? We discussed that one. And any specific tips for getting buy-in? Yeah, as far as the getting buy-in, that's a bit of the investing in the partner relationships we discussed here. And I think really comes down to just, being fairly authentic with the folks that you're working with, establishing that sense of trust and collaboration that you're really working to achieve these common goals for the customer and for the business together. So I haven't personally had too many challenges with that one from, I'm not sure if the buy-in is from the other stakeholders or from your team itself. I think in terms of maybe buy-in from the team itself, that's where, going to these first few bullets around, really taking that time one-on-one with each individual, like really just treat each person as an individual. Ask them on that first meeting, what are their career goals? What are their aspirations? What are their passions? What are their pet peeves? That really helps develop trust that you're going to help them achieve those goals. And to be honest, I think that's probably one of the most important things when you introduce, because when you introduce yourself as a new manager, because that's probably the biggest question on people's mind once they get a new manager is, what does this mean for me? And so I think, the sooner that you can help show those individuals that you're helping them achieve those goals, do what they want to do, getting roadblocks out of the way that they don't enjoy or holding them back. Maybe that's a new process change you need to make, or a platform investment that needs to be made. Those are, I think, some quick ways to gain buy-in. Gosh, is there something I would have done differently? I mean, to be honest, I think most of this talk is built on like things that I've tried, what worked, what didn't work. Kind of have to, I think that's where a lot of the learning comes from, is just seeing, what was effective, what wasn't. So there's honestly so many. I think, yeah, one example that I'll use is that introducing yourself. That was something I would say I did later than I would have done going back. So I think my team found it useful once I did share all of that about my approach, the team norms and whatnot. But it did kind of come through more gradually over time. And I think now that I have that, I would just share that from pretty much day one, balancing like we discussed, where there's some things you're going to share about yourself and there's some things you're going to learn from the others, and then you're going to kind of build this team together with those two parts. All right, how do you know when is the right time to become a manager? In your opinion, are there any necessary steps before you ask to become a manager? For example, being X years in the company or Y years in the industry? I actually don't really go off of the years so much in company or industry. Sure, I think there's probably some distribution might be available somewhere online where people have looked at, on what's the average, what's the median in terms of the number of years folks are in industry before they become a manager. But I think I kind of like to think about it in terms of the previous slide I had around what are you looking for in that manager. And so, it's once, and what are things to consider yourself? So we talked about, whether you're ready to take on more responsibilities, whether you're role modeling, the deliverables and the culture. So yeah, probably your first day out of college, joining the company, you're going to be less likely in a position to do that because you're learning it yourself. You're drinking from the fire hose, onboarding as well. But yeah, I think beyond that, maybe using those questions, you would get a sense of whether you're ready. And I just, in general, for any role change, I'm a big fan of the kind of try before you buy, if you will. So all of those aspects I mentioned around, being a mentor, leading team projects, those are some great ways to practice and really evaluate for yourself if you feel ready and you're going to be able to be successful in that role. And yeah, I think for any change, like there's always going to be a sense of like, you're not going to be 100% ready. There's always going to be some stretch in learning. And I think that's actually recommended in role changes to try things that are going to push you a bit further and ensure that you have that growing and growth and learning. So I think finding a balance there, but yeah, answering some of those first questions around whether you think this is the path for you, and then whether you've had a few opportunities to experience it are good ways to know if you're ready there. All right. one question here is, how about if they don't want to listen to you because of ageism, either you're too old or too young? Yeah, and this came up, I think, maybe as we were talking about gaining buy-in from your team. So yeah, I think, for any of these types of, biases, conscious or not, I guess my recommendation is just to really focus on the substance. So, if you're, so we talked about, for one, demonstrating that you're going to be there to help the team members achieve their goals, help their careers. So that's probably the most impactful thing you can do. Then they probably won't care about those other aspects as well. And and then showing, what are some things that, they're going to be able to still learn from you, or ways that you can help them. I think that's, kind of related as well. But yeah, as soon as they can see the advantages for themselves, then I think some of these others will kind of go to the wayside. How valuable do you think are professional courses in management? For example, masters in management, both before a career and during the career. Yeah, so we'll talk, I'll go into that next. That's probably a good segue to kind of keep going here. A few trainings that I've found helpful over the years. Let's see, I took some classes, for example, at Harvard Business School before I was still kind of doing internships, but before I was kind of full-time in the industry. And to be honest, I didn't feel like I was as able to readily apply that. There were things around organizational design, performance management, but I probably learned the most about both of those once I was actually in the scenario and learning it. So I think everybody has different learning styles, but I'll just say what was effective for me. I've enjoyed learning while I'm in the job. So, still taking a break for learning. We actually have dedicated learning time blocks, and sometimes a learning week that we block off in our team to really invest in that, because it helps us achieve the next level for the whole group. But I do enjoy that, because I find that I can kind of go from the training and then the next day bring it back to the job. But to be honest, I haven't had as many more formal trainings recently. I think recently a lot of my learning has come from mentorship and best practice sharing with other managers. So I've helped start a manager community as well across our group that's forming, and there's several that have existed, and just joining those forums where we can talk with other managers about, what are some approaches that you're trying for your team during 2020 in this remote environment, and while folks have so much that they're dealing with outside of work. So I've found that that mentorship and kind of peer mentorship is valuable as well. What about having a continuous learning culture in your team? I think it's amazing. I think that might have come up when I talked about the growth mindset comment, but yeah, I think that's huge. And we talked about getting buy-in from your team. I think everybody, hopefully you're hiring people that want to learn and grow. I know that's a huge interest in my team in particular. And yeah, and so I think that's a fun thing we do sometimes, like team learning projects. That's a great way to do further collaboration and have buddies. People really enjoy that. We did a learning week last week where we had at the end a presentation to share what we're each learning. We had some prizes, kind of like we've done after hackathons, that kind of created a little bit more excitement. So I think that's a great way, so that it's a great for retention as well. It helps people feel like, hey, I can still continue to learn and grow in this team. There's other aspects for that too, in terms of new responsibilities and whatnot, and various other topics. But yeah, I think that's important, having continuous learning. All right, let me keep going a little bit with the content, and then we'll come back here as well. Let's see. Well, actually, hold on. Let me just tick off a couple of these quickly. Or is it better to stay in the career and have a natural progression towards manager? I'm not sure what that was comparing. Yeah, I mentioned that I think the peer to manager is one of the more common paths. I think for a first manager role, it is nice to have some of the experience doing what your team has done, but I think many of these management skills we discussed are transferable. So as long as you are, a quick learner, which I think is, key for many of these roles, these levels, I think you can take on new domains as well and kind of have that balance in terms of what is the experience you're bringing to the new team, and then what are you learning from that as well. And then what about an MBA? Is there any use at all? Yeah, I think MBA is a valuable experience. I think, there's probably many questions to consider about whether that's right for you. I have hired several MBAs into my current team. I found for the work we do in data science, they're great at being able to take ambiguous problems, structure them, create a framework, and move forward. And that's actually when we talked about the peer mentoring. I see even others in my team will go to those folks to help them figure out, hey, how should I structure this project? So there are definitely values. I think that's, there's kind of a decision on whether you want to take time off from work to do that, whether you want to do the evening MBAs. So quite a few things to consider there. And I think it's also common when people are transitioning industries. That's one scenario where, you get a new network. It's a good breaking point. If you have a new business idea that you want to start off, it can help with a lot of learnings that are helpful for that. So yeah, lots of considerations there. Okay, so I'll just briefly touch on these next couple of trainings because there are references that you can go to for more details. These are a couple that I've connected with over the years. This one's called a Leadership Challenge. There's a book you can get and trainings and also surveys you can take yourself to see how you're executing across each of these areas. So some of these are concepts we discussed already, but basically the role of the manager to role model, the way that we want things to be done in the group, living the values, inspiring that shared vision. So we talked about communicating the clarity, challenging the process. So this is, raising those new ideas and not just doing things as they've always been done. Enabling others to act. So doing, effectively delegating across the group, aligning projects with people's passions and strengths, fostering trust within the group. We'll talk about that. And then encouraging the hearts. This was the celebrating success. And one metric that or ratio that you can have in mind is, like, in general for people, we like to have a 5 or 6 to 1 positive to negative, or you could say constructive ratio. And so just kind of be mindful about that as you think about the messages you're sharing with the team, to kind of keep a healthy energy, both at the team level and with specific individuals. Another one that I enjoyed was this one called Situational Leadership 2. So you often hear about how, as a manager, you want to take a more personalized approach with each individual in your team. But there was still kind of a question for me when I first heard that, as far as, what does that actually mean? So I thought this actually means. So I thought this was a useful example. It was pretty concrete. One way that you would want to tailor your approach is based on what stage the individual is on your team for the specific topic area that you're discussing. So just to give a concrete example, if you have a brand new hire, maybe from university to the group, they're going to be looking for a lot more direction. So they're going to want more of a checklist, hey, here's your first project, here's steps 1, 2, 3, 4 to go about it, and, get some momentum and some experience doing that before they take on a broader area. Whereas if we would go to the, S4, or even starting at 3, like people, these are people that, might have been more experienced in the space. They've done several projects in that area. So for them, you're actually going to want to give a more inspiring delegation for this project. You're going to want to share, or maybe you're not even delegating projects, but maybe they're coming up with ideas based on the context and the goals that you've shared. So if you would take a more senior member of the team and you would tell them, hey, here's step 1, 2, 3, 4 for how to go about this, that's actually going to be fairly demotivating for them. In contrast, if you go back to the new hire and you told them, like, hey, your job is to help expand our audience or increase retention for this area, like that's going to be a little bit too vague or ambiguous for them, but that might be great for the more experienced person. So that's just an example of how the same approach is not going to work for two different people, and just really meeting them where they are is an effective style. So last, this is a bit of a summary of just other considerations as you're honing your management skills. You'll hear about coaching. Coaching is essentially a way to give guidance or feedback without telling the answer of what you want people to do, without being completely directive. To be honest, I think if there's some cases where you really just need to say something and you have a clear plan, like just say that. It's actually more frustrating to just get these questions. But there's others where you want to be open to the fact that, like, hey, others on your team might have other ways of achieving a goal. And I love kind of being blown away with new ideas that folks come up with that I might not have thought of, and end up being more effective than what I would have even tried. So I think creating that space is helpful. Coaching comes up a lot in mentoring, where you kind of, someone says they have a challenge, you ask things like, well, what is most challenging about this? What is holding you back? Open-ended questions that help them think through it in a different way. And sometimes it's even helpful to have somebody who's not so close to the problem ask these questions. So yeah, that's a way that, some different styles you can try out by scenario. I mentioned autonomy there because that comes up as well, as far as, we talked about the S4, like how people go about their work. There's actually a specific term about this, but, a lot of people's job satisfaction comes from like that control of being able to decide how they can go about their work, maybe even what hours they get to do it. Just some of that flexibility, I think, is a benefit. Caring for your team. So, I have a pet peeve around creating fire drills when I'm delegating. So I always want to share, if there's some new task that's come up that we need to accomplish, I want to share that as soon as possible. So I give the next person the most time to do that, and create predictability for my team, so they're not just getting, random asks at any hour. They can really structure and do their best work in that way. So I think that's one way to care for your team. Others is, how do you create a culture so people do prioritize their health and work-life balance, so you can avoid burnout, which I think has been, a relevant topic this past year, with, needing to be more kind of judicious about when you start and end your days, for example, as you're in the same place. Let's see, this next one around fostering trust. So there's a lot of books, I'll reference those, about, how to have authentic leadership, how to create psychological safety in your team, create a sense of belonging. So I think this does, really lend itself to team performance. If people can feel safe, feel like they're encouraged to share their ideas, you're going to get better results. I think one thing that related to that is, your approach in terms of how you address issues that are going on in the world. I think that's come up quite a bit this past year, and there's certain balances you'll strike as far as, politics or religion or whatnot, but there are certain things that you'll need to kind of stand up for, whether it's things that you speak to or, causes that you invest in, to let folks know that you care about what's happening in the world and that they're in a safe place in your team. I think, one thing we've also been thinking about this year, but also applies in general, is like, what are ways to bring the team together? So we talked about some of these team exercises, like developing your team norms. I think sharing your values, you can have the team values, but I think also just hearing from everybody individually about what they value and why is actually a really insightful exercise. We're doing this right now, where we start each team meeting with somebody sharing their about me section, like I had mentioned in the beginning. That's another way to get to know folks on another level. Probably the favorite section of our offsites is always the Icebreaker. So we have a number of fun games. Sometimes they're team building games, sometimes they're things to kind of learn a little more about each individual. But those are amazing for helping the team come together. And sometimes, these things seem like, oh, well, that's not directly related to the work, so why is that important? for one, I think we work better together when we have a better understanding of each other. We are able to get the context better of what we're each trying to say. We assume best intent. So it is actually very important to have that connection. And yeah, it's another part of, we had asked people on my team what is something that they value or want in their work, and fun was one that came up. We spend a lot of time at work, and I think making it enjoyable and exciting for folks is having some humor is great too. Someone asked earlier about ways to continue to grow as a manager, so I think having that continuous feedback is a great one as well. So requesting feedback, if your company has mechanisms for that, or just doing that on your own, you can always ways I like to check in on that is to ask people, hey, we've been working together for a while, what are some things you think are working well? What are some things that you think aren't working as well as they could? And what are some ideas that you might have for how we can further grow this collaboration together? And I think people are a lot more comfortable sharing feedback once they can start celebrating the good things. That tells you things to continue. And then, they feel open to share that balanced view too. And I think just being really open to that feedback, not taking it personally, taking it as a learning opportunity, is a great way to really have that continuous growth. And it also means that if you're doing this consistently, none of those issues end up becoming big issues. They're just, small details and topics that you quickly roll through and you're kind of growing to the next thing. The role of the manager to prioritize is particularly important this year with everyone having so much going on. I think being really disciplined around and focused around what are we going to do that has the biggest impact is actually a great thought exercise to do always, but even further important now. Hiring is a huge part of the manager's role. Having the great people is going to make a huge difference. So finding ways. There's a lot of approaches today in terms of how to interview for more of the real world scenarios of what's going on in your team versus some of the more academic or traditional interview styles. So those have been great to explore and try out. There's a number of things around, how do you write job postings in an inclusive way, having a diverse set of interviewers, give the interviewee some content in advance so that they can prepare equally across, fairly across candidates. So a number of different interview tips there. Another one I'll add is that, I think often we should look for qualities that we've found to be successful in the org, but then also look for compliments. Like, what are things that you or others in your team aren't doing that if you added, would just create this better orchestra of what you can all accomplish together. Performance is another key area. So, documenting clearly, this might be done by your HR department or even further in your group around what is really valued in the group, what are the expectations, so that everyone can see that broadly, and then, having one-on-one discussions too for each individual around their career growth. We also have some common templates that we use when we come together as the managers that helps us align as far as, just very generally, what are the things that we consider as we evaluate performance so that we can do that in a structured way. Rewarding the things that you want to continue to promote in your group, whether that's the what or the how work is being done. And then finally, giving clear feedback. I think that a couple things I see sometimes. One is that a manager might shy away from giving feedback because it's uncomfortable. We talked about like the being uncomfortable, getting comfortable, being uncomfortable. But I think just remembering that, like, if somebody has a blind spot, that you're not helping them by not sharing it with them. I think sharing it, but then I say, sharing it as an advocate. I think if you've done all the things we discussed around building trust, then it doesn't come across as a critique. It really comes across more as support. And so I think that's important to share it clearly. There's a book I'll reference about feedback. I think that gives some good structures for how to have that conversation. And I think another thing that happens sometimes is for high performers, people might not give feedback, and that actually becomes a negative too. I mean, the feedback can be very varied in the nature, but I think giving folks ideas about ways that they can continue to build and grow their career, giving tools or resources to achieve that is something that, you know, high achievers are going to want as well, and seeing kind of a clear path. So won't have time to go into all these, but just for the last few minutes here, I want to quickly sum up a few references that, and I'll post the deck as well if folks want to look into these for more information. But here are a number of the manager and leadership principles I discussed from Microsoft. Google had a really interesting research where they had a data-driven approach in terms of looking at the performance of managers over years and what were the qualities for the ones that were most effective. And these are the things that they came out with. And then there's a number of different company leadership principles that aren't necessarily specific to management, but I think are you know, interesting ideas so that as you really hone your own personal leadership style, you can look across these frameworks as well as others in the industry and, you know, see what you identify with so that you can really lead in a really natural and authentic way. And then find ways to, you know, connect that with your current company. Here's some book recommendations. I have briefly referenced a few of these along the way. Manager's Path I really like because it's actually structured from, you know, being an individual to a tech lead where you're kind of leading more projects but not the formal people manager yet. But that's another good experience I probably should reference as far as, you know, building way to management to kind of being a manager of managers, a CTO. And so that's a nice structure that you can really grow with as you read. The Making of a Manager by Julie has a number of her practices from Facebook. I think are a number of just great reminders to consider along the way. Simone Sinek is amazing. You can, that's one book that I like from him, but you can follow his podcast. He has a lot of great leadership principles and considerations. Dare to Lead by Brene Brown. She talks a lot about authentic leadership. We talked about critical conversations, difficult conversations, so that's gives some frameworks there. First, Break All the Rules gives an interesting approach. One example is like, hey, rather than just focusing on the growth areas, really focus on people's talents and just find, you know, align people with responsibilities that align with their talents and strengths, and they're going to be able to achieve more and through that. Thanks for the Feedback is the feedback book that I mentioned, and then Drive is gives some ideas about how to inspire people in your group through purpose and mastery and things to consider as you're creating that vision. So finally, just to wrap up, you know, we covered a number of different management related topics. We discussed, you know, some questions to ask yourself to consider if you'd want to be a manager. We talked about ways to develop the skills. We went through some onboarding tips for how to be successful on day one and beyond, and then ways to continue growing as you progress in your career. So here are a few ways you can keep in touch. I realize we're kind of close to the end here, so probably just be able to take one or two questions here, but do feel free to, you know, follow any of these channels or contact me as well if you have other follow-up questions. And with that, I'll see if we have, you know, maybe one or two more questions that folks would like to ask.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Lisa.
Great. Yeah, I think we're right at the end, which is one that came up, having a most inclusive in culture in your management style and team. Yeah, there's I think that's important to foster the best ideas. I think there are a lot of practices such as, you know, we talked about being able to share meeting invites in advance, content so people can work in different styles, you know, addressing difficult topics and conversations, being authentic with the group. There's actually 10 different inclusive styles that Microsoft has put together, so I'm happy to share those offline as well. But I'll hand it back to Rebecca to wrap up. Thanks everybody for joining today.
Thank you all for joining as well, and thank you, Lisa, for taking some time to do this presentation. It was amazing. We got some positive feedback in the commentary as well. Just sharing on the slide here, Lisa's upcoming session, What Women in Tech Need to Get a Seat at the Table, and then the final session, which is on April 12th, Tips for Effective Data Science in the Enterprise. So if you have time and interest, feel free to join us at those next sessions. I also dropped in the chat a bit earlier a link to the previous session that Lisa put on in regards to networking, and I'm dropping into the chat right now our meeting survey. So if you don't mind submitting that, that would be great, really helpful for us to use that feedback to develop content. Also, if you haven't joined our community, if you found out about this event through a friend, do look into visiting us at microsoftreactor.com. You can follow us on Twitter. We recently started a monthly mailing list where we'll just shoot out once a month a bunch of events that we think are relevant and located nearby to you, so in your time zone. We also primarily post our events on Meetup. So if you happen to be near one of our reactor locations, with us being virtual at the moment, you know, as long as the time works for you, do feel free to join that group as well. Let me just pop over to the Q&A. So just lots of positive feedback. Thank you all so much. And Lisa, this was great. So until the next one, thank you all.
Great. Bye, everybody.